Hi, I'm Dev Clough with Hooked on Driving. This video is about how to become a better and safer driver at track day events. Most of us go out and drive as hard as possible with the expectation that we will improve. In fact, we will get faster this way, but there are risks with this approach, and I would like you to think about a slightly different process. I'm going to be talking about building consistency as a driver. Suppose we take out just a bit of the pace and really focus on driving as consistently as possible. Ignore lap times, but be sure to repeat every part of every lap. Imagine if our tires were paintbrushes and we drove 10 laps, and the path we painted over the 10 laps was just the width of our tires. And now add to that every time we brake and accelerate it is exactly in the same place with exactly the same force. Every action happens every lap identically. I'm dating myself here, but as a kid my hero was Sterling Moss, the Michael Schumacher of his day. Sterling was quoted as saying, "I never drove a perfect lap." If Sterling didn't think he did, what are the odds that you and I will? Probably not good. But it does tell you how Sterling measured the quality of his driving. The perfect lap for Sterling would be much like what I have just described, except it would all be done right at the absolute limit. Let's take a look at a hypothetical chart that displays consistency. The x-axis shows 16 laps to the same corner, plotting consistency. For the sake of this discussion, our consistency line includes every action involved in negotiating this corner, except actual pace. Pace is graphed as a percent of the driver's limit, shown on the y-axis of our graph. Of course, anything exceeding 100% of the driver's limit would result in a spin or an off. Here's the chart with Sterling's consistency line displayed. There are fluctuations, but they're small. Remember, Sterling didn't claim to be perfect. Also note that on these laps, Sterling is well below the limit. He could increase his driver's limit by quite a bit and still not have an issue. Now let's take a look at the same chart but with a less skilled driver. The fluctuations are much greater, but particularly note that there are laps when this driver is right at the limit. If our driver tries to add any pace, there will be laps where they will exceed their driver's limit. Sometimes drivers do that and have an incident as a result. Let's take a look at some video to demonstrate. We've taken two back-to-back laps and displayed them split screen to highlight fluctuations from lap to lap. Just as a note, this is a talented driver who has gone on to racing and done well. What we will demonstrate is that our driver has some significant inconsistencies, but is pushing hard at his driver's limit. Exiting turn 6 at Laguna Seca, lap 1 is displayed on the left and lap 2 is displayed on the right. Just notice the car positioning, it's not quite the same between the two laps. Its car's a little farther to the right on lap 2 than it is on lap 1. Here we're heading down the hill out of the corkscrew. Notice how much farther left the car is pointed on the second lap, the right side video, than on the first lap, the left side video. Quite a significant difference here. At the apex of turn 9, our driver is right on the berm on lap 2, but on lap 1 he's several feet off. As we get ready to turn in for turn 2 at the end of the front straight, notice how closely the car is positioned from lap 1 to lap 2. It's pretty consistent right here. If you look closely entering turn 2, that our driver has turned in already on the left panel, which is lap 1, and is just preparing to turn in on lap 2. Just a couple of frames later now, and you can see that the early turn-in has resulted in an early apex as well. So here's our result. Because of the early turn-in and early apex on lap 1 on the left, you can see our driver's had to use a lot more of the berm at the track out. So he's used up most of his margin for error here. Our lap 1 turn 3 track out is all the way to the very edge of the berm. Lap 2 has left a little bit of a cushion. He's just tracked out to the edge of the berm. On lap 2 on the right hand side, you'll notice our driver is already at the berm, so he's gotten to the berm early. Once our driver got to the berm early, he's going to leave the berm early, and you can see that's exactly what's happened in this shot. Now, as you can see, on lap 1 we've tracked out perfectly right to the edge of the berm, but lap 2 we've overshot, and the results are pretty disastrous, as you'll see in just a second. Of course, the point is, you can't push hard if you're not consistent, since your fluctuations will eventually get you in trouble. That is what happened to our driver in the video. He got off the chart because he was pushing harder than his consistency would allow. So as a driver, it makes a lot more sense, if you want to increase pace, to first become very consistent. Let's get back to our hypothetical chart to show what I mean. The red line shows our driver being inconsistent, and we already know what the result could be if they just push harder. Now let's add a green line to show what happens if they run at the same pace, but improve their consistency. Notice how by leveling the spikes on the chart, they have created a margin for error. That gives them room to up the pace a bit, without exceeding the limit. Be aware that each time the pace is upped, it is easy to start giving back some consistency. So it's very important to make these pace increases in small increments, and to spend time at the new level to smooth out the graph again. As Sterling said, he never drove a perfect lap. I think it's true to say that all drivers, from Sterling on down to us mere mortals, make lots of mistakes on track. If you agree that's true, I think you'll also agree that fixing errors is a lot of what we're doing on track. So what's the difference between the good and the great? It's how early the driver recognizes when things are less than consistent. The great drivers recognize it when they have turned in a foot early, and inexperienced drivers don't catch that mistake until they run out of track at the exit, which is the result of turning in early. Fixing that mistake a tenth of a second after it happens is a tiny correction that the car barely feels. Fixing it 4 seconds late is huge, and might not even be possible. This points out the second critical factor in consistency. To be consistent, you must know what consistent looks and feels like. Every lap you drive snaps a new picture of the corner, creating a composite image of how it should look and feel. Overlay Sterling's 16 laps and you have a sharply focused image. It's very easy to spot tiny imperfections and fix them early. Overlay our new driver's laps and you probably can't even identify the image. If the driver's image has so much range to it, spotting and dealing with variations is just as imprecise. Here's a video of a newer driver who is pushing beyond his driver's limits. It ends, unfortunately, similar to our last video. This driver might fit on the red graph we've been using. So when he is forced out of position by a car entering the track from pit lane, he gets himself into a bunch of trouble because he just doesn't have the data to understand that what he's doing isn't going to work. Since he can't tell how much trouble he's in, the problem keeps magnifying itself. Back on the video, when our driver passes the camera car, he's got plenty of opportunity to fix things. All he would need to do would be to lift and brake early without tracking all the way out. That leaves the camera car somewhere to go, and our driver, at reduced pace, drives the tighter line through the corner. Instead, he delays braking to rush past the camera car and get back on line. But that has him pointing left and carrying too much speed at turn-in. Still, he would have been okay if he just had stayed off the throttle and let the corner scrub off speed. But he just did not have the data to get that done. If our driver had been focused on consistency all day instead of pace, could this have been avoided? Maybe so. So let me summarize what I've been talking about. How close you can drive to the upper end of your driver's limit is totally a function of how consistently you drive. If you're not consistent, you must leave a margin for error to allow for your inconsistencies. To do this, you must understand how consistent you are as a driver. You don't have to crash to know whether you're being consistent. You just have to be observing. If you're focused only on pace, you may feel good about a corner that felt fast, or where maybe you tracked all the way out. But if you missed that the reason you needed all that pavement was because you turned in early, you're on a slow and risky approach to improving as a driver. Another important aspect to consistency is how it works to generate improvement. When trying to improve on something requiring so many precise actions that all interact with each other, it is really important to make just one change at a time. Otherwise, the data becomes muddled. For example, if you decide to brake differently and also alter your line, even if you get a good result, you can't be sure what it was that helped. It's very possible that the braking change hurt your result, or the line change helped a lot. The best result would have occurred if you hadn't changed your braking at all, but you just won't know that. As long as you're not consistent, you can't fine-tune your skills because your results will be muddled by the fact that more than one thing is changing on a regular basis. I hope my argument for making consistency as a driver the foundation for your development is making sense. If so, let's talk a bit about how to actually become more consistent. Here are some ideas. First of all, don't let pace cost you consistency. Find a brisk pace that's comfortable and allows you to observe what's happening. If you're in survival mode, this can happen. Next, be sure to use reference points. Find reference points for all the significant actions such as braking, turn in, and track out. The cones we set are great as a starting point, but as you gain experience, find points that will always be exactly the same, such as a point on a berm, or a crack, or color change in the pavement, or the brake markers. Next, don't limit yourself to visual references. Tire sounds, pedal pressure, engine RPM readings, and sound. All of those things contribute. How does it feel? Braking and turning forces. There is another great tool to help. If possible, use a camcorder. Think you drove a perfect lap? Check the video. And when you get some great laps, review them before your next event to get back in the groove before you actually arrive. For every driver we have at HOD, there is a slightly different approach. Some folks want to know every technical detail of vehicle dynamics and slip angle and suspension geometry. And some folks just want to drive and have a blast. Maybe they get enough of the rest of the week, or maybe thinking that way is just not in their DNA. HOD is about folks having a great time at this hobby on whatever level makes sense for them, as long as it's safe. And being consistent is all about being safe. What we do is a blast, and I'm sure part of that is that being in a car at speed has risk. Maybe we take that risk for granted on the freeway, but at the track we have a lot more freedom. We all want to be safer and better drivers. Consistency is right at the heart of that outcome.